Good morning. Buenos días. Si se puede. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Today, La Paz joins a long line of national monuments, stretching from the Statue of Liberty to the Grand Canyon. Monuments that tell the story of who we are as Americans. Our world is a better place because Cesar Chavez decided to change it. Let us honor his memory, but most importantly, let's live up to his example. Thank you. God bless you. God bless America. Si se puede. Si se puede. Si se puede. Thank you, everybody.
Chavez was a poor migrant farm worker with an 8th grade education who became an icon by dedicating his life to civil rights.
Grand Rapids leaders, community members, and educators united to honor the life and legacy of Cesar Chavez. The event highlighted the importance of unity. Speeches and performance were given from both local and global voices.
I decided to forego law school, and I did that 3.5 years working with him as his personal assistant, traveling the country and the world with him.
This morning in strong support, first of all, of HRS 76, a resolution to create a national holiday in honor of a great human being, Cesar Chavez. Mr. Speaker, already 9 states celebrate his life. I am proud that California was the first. The legacy that he left on the history of this nation must be recognized. He made a difference, not only for Latinos, not only for migrant workers, but for the poor and the working poor, and he also built a coalition of conscience across racial and economic boundaries.
A farm worker march and a union march reminiscent of the 1960s. Everyone marching out here to celebrate Cesar Chavez Day with ties to the present and ties to the past. What does Si Se Puede mean to you?
It means any fight that comes against the people can win, no matter what. When we stand united, we win.
Cesar Chavez Elementary School students marched with their posters to commemorate Cesar Chavez's life and what the local activists meant to farm workers and the challenges they faced.
We just got some pictures in from the White House showing the First Lady honoring the late labor and civil rights leader, Cesar Chavez. Today is Cesar Chavez Day, and the First Lady planted a new rose bush in the White House Rose Garden today with Chavez's granddaughter, Julie Chavez Rodriguez. And while remembrances like that one are important, many are focused on what...
They built that, not overnight, brick by brick, ceremony by ceremony, clip by clip, decade by decade. They constructed something, and then they handed it to you and told you to venerate it. They decided what he was. They decided what you were allowed to know. They decided which facts made the cut and which ones got quietly set aside because they complicated the story that they needed to tell. And for 50 years, the people closest to the truth said nothing. Not because they didn't know, because they decided the movement needed to saint badly enough to keep the secret. My name is Darren, and this is TrapThink. And today we're going to pull on this thread all the way to the end. We're going to talk about Cesar Chavez, what he did, all the things that were done in his name, and what it tells us about the machine that turns men into monuments. But more than that, we're going to talk about the trap, because Chavez is just a current example. The mechanism that built him is still running, and if you don't understand how it works, you're already inside it. In Genesis 11, the people of Babel are gathered together, and here's what they say to each other. Genesis 11:4 says, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves." Let us make a name for ourselves. That's not ancient history. That's a press release. That's a monument dedication. That's a bust on a credenza. They always want to build something. The question is, what are they actually building it on? Let's find out. Before we talk about the myth, we need to talk about the man, because the trap only works if you never actually look at who you're dealing with. Cesar Chavez co-founded the United Farm Workers Union in 1962, alongside a woman named Dolores Huerta. And I want to be clear about something from the start, because this matters when it comes later. The cause was real. Farm workers in California in the 1960s were working brutal conditions, no overtime protections, no right to organize, no legal recourse, wages that kept entire families in poverty across generations. The grape strikes, the boycotts, the marches, these weren't theater. They moved the needle on real suffering. Real people's lives got better because of what the UFW did. That matters, because the trap doesn't work with a completely evil person. Nobody builds a 50-year myth around someone with no redeeming qualities. The trap works because there's enough genuine good to justify looking away from everything else that's bad. But here's what was always true about Cesar Chavez, what was documented, what was available, what journalism chose not to make central to his story. He was autocratic. The UFW wasn't a democratic organization. It was Chavez's organization. And people who challenged him got pushed out. There were purges. Longtime organizers who had given years to the movement found themselves removed when they disagreed with his leadership. A biography by journalist Miriam Powell laid this out in detail. It didn't change the hagiography. He was obsessive about control of the organization's image. There was a gap between the public face of the movement and what happened internally, and Chavez worked hard to maintain that gap. And then there is the detail that if you told most Americans today, they genuinely would not believe you, because it cuts so completely against everything they were taught about this man. Cesar Chavez was a fierce, documented opponent of undocumented immigrants.
In pursuit of his dream, Chavez has gone from a poor farm boy to an internationally acclaimed figure. But nothing means more to him than the well-being of his people.
Cesar Chavez. Now, Cesar Chavez has been refashioned by President Obama and other activists as some kind of civil rights activist on behalf of Mexican immigrants. He was nothing of the sort. Cesar Chavez was born in Arizona. He was as American as you and me. He spoke fluent English, and he spent a good part of his time opposing migrant workers coming across the border from Mexico. Why? Because they lowered wages for American workers.
He believed undocumented workers undercut union labor by accepting lower wages with no protections. And he didn't just hold this position philosophically. The UFW reportedly operated what was called a wet line, a patrol along the U.S.-Mexico border designed to report undocumented crossers to the INS, the Border Patrol. He sent his own people to police the border against the very community he is now memorialized as a champion of. Let that settle for a second, because the man whose name is on dozens of schools in Latino neighborhoods across the American Southwest ran border enforcement operations against Latino migrants. That's not a right-wing hit piece. That's documented history. It was available. It just wasn't useful to the story being built. This is where the myth-making starts, not with the abuse allegations, not with any of what New York Times published last week. It starts here, years earlier, with the decision to flatten a complicated, contradictory, autocratic man into a clean symbol. Once you make that decision, once you decide that the symbol is more important than the truth of the person, you've created the conditions for everything that comes after. Because when you make a man untouchable, you don't just protect his reputation, you protect everything he does in the shadows of that reputation. The myth didn't build itself. Somebody built it. And understanding who built it and why is the whole game. So walk the timeline with me. 1965, the Delano grape strike. Chavez becomes a national figure. The media needs a face for farm worker organizing, and Chavez is charismatic, disciplined about his image, and politically useful to the left-leaning press corps that wants to cover the labor movement. He photographs well, he speaks well, he fasts, he marches. He is, from a narrative standpoint, almost perfect.
Throughout the struggle, Chavez taught his members the nonviolent principles of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi. Nonviolence is more powerful than violence, Chavez said.
1995, California establishes Cesar Chavez Day as a state holiday. First state to do it. This is not just a commemoration, this is institutionalization. The state of California has now made it official policy that this man's legacy be taught, honored, and observed. The symbol has been codified into law. 2012, Obama designates a national monument in Chavez's name in Keene, California. Standing at the dedication, the President of the United States places the full weight of federal recognition on this symbol. If you had any doubts before about whether Chavez was beyond scrutiny, well, this ends them. You do not publicly question the man the president just put on a monument.
Today, La Paz joins a long line of national monuments stretching from the Statue of Liberty to the Grand Canyon. Monuments that tell the story of who we are as Americans. I want them to learn about a small man guided by enormous faith in a righteous cause, a loving God, the dignity of every human being. Our world is a better place because Cesar Chavez decided to change it. Let us honor his memory, but most importantly, let's live up to his example. Thank you. God bless you. God bless America. Si se puede. Si se puede. Si se puede. Thank you, everybody.
2021. Joe Biden places a bust of Cesar Chavez on the credenza behind his Oval Office desk on his very first day as president. This is a deliberate, calculated signal to Latino voters, to the labor movement, to the media. The symbol is politically useful on day one of a new administration. It is placed in the most photographed room in the whole world.
When President Biden decorated his office, he set up a bust of your father. Why is it important that we know who Cesar Chavez is?
My father's message of opportunity and fairness is an American value that should be cherished and celebrated by everybody.
Now, here's the question that nobody in the mainstream media is asking right now, because asking it would require them to implicate themselves. The New York Times investigation that dropped last week took 5 years to complete. 5 years of reporting, sourcing, verifying, building the case. That means that the Times started this investigation in 2021, the same year that Biden put the bust in the Oval Office, the same year the symbol was at the absolute peak of his political utility. And the question underneath that question, why did it take until 2026? Dolores Huerta is in her 90s. The women who were abused have been carrying this for decades. The abuse didn't happen in secret. It happened inside an organization, around people, in a movement. Somebody always knew. Multiple somebodies, actually. Why did it take a 5-year New York Times investigation to surface what people inside the UFW have known for 50 years? The answer's not complicated. The symbol was useful. The incentive structure rewarded protecting it. Politicians got mileage from invoking Chavez. The media got cultural credibility from celebrating him. The institutions that had his name on their buildings got a piece of his reflected glory. Everyone who had attached themselves to the symbol had a stake in the symbol remaining intact. This is how the machine works. It's not a conspiracy. It doesn't require anyone sitting in a room deciding to cover up abuse. It just requires enough people in enough institutions making the same calculation. The cost of questioning this is higher than the cost of staying quiet. And so they stay quiet. And then years pass, and the symbols grow larger, and the shadow underneath it grows darker. Isaiah 44, verse 20. He feeds on ashes. A deluded heart has led him astray. He cannot deliver himself or say, "Is there not a lie in my right hand?" The context is a man who cuts down a tree, uses half of it for firewood to warm himself and cook his bread, and takes the other half, the same wood from the same tree, and carves it into a god and bows down to it and says, "Deliver me, for you are my God." Isaiah's point is not that the man is uniquely stupid. His point is that the man cannot see what he's doing. He has been feeding on ashes so long that he can no longer recognize them. The delusion is not in his intellect. It is in his heart. He wants to believe in the thing that he built, so he does. That's not ancient Babylon. That's every journalist, every politician, every institution that built an altar out of Cesar Chavez and then looked away from what was happening in the altar's shadows. Now we get to the part of the story that is genuinely hard to process, not because it's complicated. It's actually very simple. It's hard to process because of what it reveals about what people are capable of when they believe enough in a cause. Dolores Huerta knew. Not vaguely, not peripherally, not in the way that you sometimes suspect something without being quite sure. She knew because she was there. She knew because she was a victim.
Tell me about meeting Cesar Chavez.
Well, Cesar and I both came out of this organization called the Community Service Organization, and that's where we both met. And what our main issue of interest was the condition of the farm workers.
And how did you two work together? Who did what?
Well, We worked together in the community service organization first, and Cesar actually didn't really pay very much attention to me. I was always following him around like a groupie because I knew he was this great organizer. When we'd have our conventions, he'd give these glowing reports about what he was doing. Very mild manner, very soft-spoken.
I didn't want to disclose this to anybody because I just didn't want to hurt the work that we were doing for farm workers.
Yeah, she doesn't call herself a victim. Yes, who would have thought? And she kept it quiet for all those decades because she believed in the cause. She didn't want to destroy the cause, she says.
According to the New York Times investigation and Huerta's own written account last week, Cesar Chavez fathered 2 of her children. She carried those pregnancies in secret. She wore baggy clothes and ponchos to conceal them. She arranged for others to raise those children. She wrote that she was able to develop relationships with them over the years, and she kept this secret, all of it, for more than 50 years. In her own statement, she explains why. Building the movement was her life's work. Securing farm workers' rights was what she had given everything to. And she was not going to let Cesar or anyone else get in the way of that. Hear that again. She was not going to let the truth get in the way of the movement. Now, I want to be careful here because Huerta was a victim. What happened to her was not her fault. The weight of what she carried for 50 years is something most of us will never be asked to understand. I'm not here to pile onto a woman in her 90s who was abused by a man that she had dedicated her life alongside. But I am going to name what she did because it has a name. She chose the institution over the people inside it. She decided that the cause was more important than the truth, including her own personal truth. And she made that choice consistently for decades, while other women were being abused by the same man she was protecting. That is what political theater looks like at its most intimate level. It is not politicians on a stage. It is a woman at the center of a movement making a calculus, the cause or the truth, and choosing the cause, and living with that choice for the rest of her life. And she was not alone. The UFW was not a 2-person operation. There were staffers, organizers, inner circle members. The New York Times didn't surface these allegations from a sealed vault. They found people willing to talk, which means that there were people who had been choosing not to talk for years, for decades. An organizational culture of silence around a man whose behavior was, at some level, known. This is the moment in the story where most coverage pivots to the legacy debate. What do we do with his name? What does it mean for the movement? How do we honor the cause without honoring the man? And I understand that impulse, but I want to stay here for a minute longer because what happened inside the UFW is not primarily a story about institutional reputation management. It's a story about what human beings do when they have decided that something that they are building is more important than the people being hurt by the building of it. That story is older than Cesar Chavez, and it will be newer than him too. The women in the New York Times investigation deserve their own space in this episode, not as evidence, not as supporting material for the larger argument about institutions and media, as people. Some of them were minors when the abuse began. They were inside the movement, daughters of farm workers, young women who had grown up seeing Cesar Chavez as a figure of almost spiritual authority in their community. He was not a stranger. He was not some predator who appeared from outside. He was the man at the center of their world, the man their parents respected, the man their community had built its dignity around. One woman said it with precision that should stop you cold. He did his grooming very well. He should get an Academy Award for all he did. She said she had love for him. She used that word, love, because that is what grooming does. It constructs something that feels like love, that functions like love, that the victim experienced as love, and then it uses that feeling as the mechanism of continued access and continued silence. Think about what these women's lives looked like from the outside. They go home to communities where Cesar Chavez Day is observed, where the school their children might attend has his name on the front of the building, where the street they drive to work on carries his name, where the President of the United States just put his face in the Oval Office, and they are carrying what was done to them in a world that is celebrating the man who did it. That is not an abstraction. That is a specific daily weight. And the media ecosystem that spent 50 years building this symbol is the same ecosystem that made it impossible for these women to be heard. Because questioning the saint was questioning the cause, and questioning the cause was something you simply did not do. Luke 17, verse 2. It would be better for him if a millstone hung around his neck and he were cast into the sea than that he should cause one of these little ones to stumble. There is no ambiguity in that statement. There is no weighing of legacy versus harm. There is no, but think of all the good he did. There is a millstone and there is a sea. Jesus is not interested in the institutional reputation of the person doing the harm. He's interested in the ones being harmed. And his verdict on the person responsible is about as final as language allows. The women who were abused by Cesar Chavez did not get to speak for 50 years. This episode is going to say their existence out loud, and it is going to say that their lives matter more than the symbol, more than the movement, more than the street signs and the school names and the holiday. They matter more than all of it. That should not be a controversial thing to say. The fact that it took 50 years, a 5-year investigation, and a New York Times front page to say it tells you everything you need to know about how the machine works. Now watch what happens when the symbol stops being useful.
Lawmakers in California now working to rename Cesar Chavez Day to Farm Worker Day. Republican Assemblywoman Alexandra Macedo introduced that measure, which calls to celebrate all of those who contribute to California's ag economy. Governors in Texas and Arizona have already said they will not be recognizing Cesar Chavez Day following the allegations that just came out.
Mayor Karen Bass has signed a proclamation renaming Cesar Chavez Day as fallout tarnishes the labor leader's legacy across California.
A unanimous vote.
The special meeting item passes 7-0.
Fresno City Council tonight took the first steps to do away with Cesar Chavez Boulevard. This comes days after allegations of sexual abuse were brought against the late labor leader, sending shockwaves across the country.
The state of Texas will not observe the Cesar Chavez holiday at the end of March. Governor Greg Abbott made the announcement after accusations of sexual abuse came to light against the late civil rights leader. The governor vowed to work with Texas lawmakers to remove Cesar Chavez Day from state law altogether. For decades, Chavez stood as an icon of labor rights and Latino heritage, but accusations that he sexually abused women and girls have people across Texas pushing to remove his name from streets, schools, and other facilities previously named in his honor.
The United Farm Workers will also skip this year's event honoring its co-founder, Cesar Chavez. Leaders with the foundation he co-founded say they're shocked about these allegations, now working to support the people who may have been harmed. The UFW said serious allegations against Chavez made his actions, quote, incompatible with our organization's values, end quote, but did not provide further details.
Within 48 hours of the New York Times investigation publishing, here is what happened. California announced it's renaming Cesar Chavez Day, the holiday it established in 1995, the first state in the country to honor them this way, to Farm Workers Day. The Fresno City Council voted unanimously to restore original street names to roads that had been renamed for Chavez as recently as 2023, a renaming that cost the city $150,000 and was, at the time, considered a meaningful act of cultural recognition. The UFW Foundation, the nonprofit arm of the union Chavez co-founded, canceled all Cesar Chavez Day activities. Institutions across the country began issuing statements of distance. That all happened in 48 hours. These are the same institutions that built the myth, the same political class that attached itself to the symbol for decades and extracted political value from that attachment. They're not responding to the victims, they're managing a liability. I want you to notice something about the speed, because the speed is the tell. The documented evidence that Chavez opposed undocumented immigrants and ran border enforcement operations against them has been available for years. The biography that detailed his autocratic leadership and internal purges has been out there for years. None of that moved these institutions to distance themselves from him. None of that prompted a city council vote. None of that got a state holiday renamed. But now the symbol is toxic. Now it costs more than it's worth, and they are moving in 48 hours. That is not a moral reckoning. That is brand management. They are not responding to the abuse of these women. They are responding to the risk of being photographed next to liability. And look at what California chose as a replacement name, Farm Workers Day. They're not abandoning the political utility of the holiday. They are laundering it. Keep the day off. Keep the curriculum mandate. Keep the political signal to labor and Latino voters. Just detach it from the man whose name is now a problem. The farm workers who the UFW genuinely helped, who are real people with real stories, are now being used as a cleanup mechanism. Their cause is the new wrapper for the same institutional self-interest. This is political theater completing its full cycle. The cycle goes like this. Build the icon, invest in the symbol, attach your brand to it, extract political and cultural value from the association. Protect the icon. When uncomfortable information surfaces, manage it, minimize it, keep the symbol intact because the symbol is still worth more than the truth costs. Sacrifice the icon. When the symbol becomes a liability, move fast, perform the reckoning loudly, get out in front of it before the association damages you, then move on to the next one. The women don't appear anywhere in that cycle. They're not the subject. They are the trigger event. Here is where I want to zoom out from Chavez specifically, because Chavez is an example of something larger. And if we leave this episode without naming the larger thing, we've done the same thing that the media does. Used a specific story as content without actually teaching the mechanism. The mechanism is this. Media does not just amplify stories. It concentrates narrative. It needs a face. It needs one name that fits on a chyron. One story arc that works as a documentary. One bust that looks good on a credenza. The complexity of a real movement, the hundreds of organizers, competing strategies, the moral compromises, the internal conflicts, the full range of human beings doing the actual work, all of that gets collapsed, compressed, reduced to a singular figure who can carry the weight of the entire story. This isn't a bug. This is how the media works. Complexity doesn't drive engagement. Symbols do. Heroes do. A name you recognize does. And so the machine selects for simplification, and the simplification produces icons, and the icons become untouchable. Because at a certain point, the icon isn't just representing the movement anymore. The icon is the movement in the public imagination. And questioning the icon means questioning everything attached to it. For the Latino community specifically, the trap was even tighter. Because Chavez wasn't just a labor leader. He was one of the very few figures that mainstream American media had elevated to iconic status from that community. When you are a community that has been largely invisible in the national narrative, and one of your own finally gets the monument and the holiday and the Oval Office bust, the pressure to protect that symbol is immense. Questioning him isn't just questioning a man. It feels like giving up the one seat at the table you were given. That's the trap inside the trap. The media creates scarcity of representation. You get one icon, maybe two, and that scarcity makes the community fiercely protective of what little they have. The protection is understandable, but it is also exactly what predators rely on. And this is not unique to Chavez. This is not unique to the Latino community. This is the playbook, and it plays everywhere. Martin Luther King was surveilled, blackmailed, and had his personal life documented in extensive detail by the FBI. How much of that documentation has been seriously reckoned with in the mainstream celebration of his legacy? Gandhi had documented relationships with young women in his household that would end careers today. How often does that surface in the way he is taught? I'm not saying that these men's contribution were fraudulent. I'm saying that the pattern of elevating a man to singular iconic status and then making him unquestionable has a consistent outcome. It creates the perfect conditions for abuse because the protection is structural. 1 Samuel chapter 8 verses 19 through 20. No, but there shall be a king over us, that we may also be like all the nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles. The prophet Samuel had warned the people of Israel about exactly what it would cost them to have a king. He laid out the price in detail, and they said no anyway. They wanted the symbol. They wanted something to point at, something that looked like power, something that said, we have someone, we have a name, we have a face that represents us. The desire to have a singular figure to march behind is not a modern media invention. It's a human default, wired deep, as old as civilization, and it has always had the same cost. So let me ask you the question directly, because this is the whole point of TrapThink. Who are you not allowed to question right now? Not Cesar Chavez. You can question him freely now. The institutions have given you permission. I mean in your world, in your media diet, your political tribe, your church, your movement. Where is the figure who sits above scrutiny, whose reputation, if you started asking honest questions about it, would cost you something, a friendship, a community, a sense of identity. Where is that icon that the people around you have decided is too important to examine? That is where the trap is. Not here, not in a story everybody is now allowed to talk about. There, in the place nobody in your circle is asking about yet. There's something specific happening in the public response to this story that I want to name, because if you don't see it, you'll get swept up by it. The people expressing the loudest grief right now are not primarily the victims. They are the people who invested their identity in the symbol.
So many folks believed in him. He was revered, almost like a godlike figure. He was our only one, man. He was our hero. And now to see this is just devastating. I'm glad my parents didn't get to see this because they loved him too.
John Quinones, veteran ABC News journalist, grew up in a family of farm workers, has spent decades covering Latino issues. He said this week that learning about the allegations felt devastating, and I believe him. That grief is real. It is the specific grief of an idol fracturing. When something you have organized part of your identity around turns out to be built on a lie, the feeling is close to what you feel when someone you love dies. It's a real loss. But here's what I want you to notice. The grief of John Quinones and the grief of every politician, journalist, activist, and community member who is processing this publicly is not the same as the grief of the women who were abused. It's not even in the same category. And yet, in the media coverage this week, those two things are being treated as if they exist on a similar plane. The women who were abused are the story. The institutional grief is the frame the media has chosen to put around the story. And the frame is doing what frames always do. It's directing your attention towards the people and institutions the media is comfortable covering, and away from the people who are harder to center. Watch how this story moves over the next few weeks. Right now, it is in phase 1. The revelation, the initial shock, the institutions scrambling to distance. In 2 or 3 weeks, it will move to phase 2. The legacy debate. What do we do with his memory? Can we separate the cause from the man? What does this mean for farm worker organizing? What does it mean for Latino representation in American history? These are legitimate questions, and media will cover them extensively. What it will not cover extensively is the women. By the time the legacy debate is in full swing, the women who were abused will have been reduced to a footnote. The inciting event that triggered a much more interesting conversation to media about institutions and symbols and representation. They will become supporting characters in a story about what to do with street signs.
And the farmers' rights movement and its union that were so tied to Chavez's image are also looking at how they'll move forward in the wake of these allegations.
NBC 7's Omari Fleming shows us what experts say they need to prioritize in order to help protect the people they serve.
Historians and political strategists say this is a moment for truth and self-reflection, a time to refocus movements on the cause, not a cult of personality. From Cesar Chavez's statue being covered up at Fresno State to the San Diego Community College District considering renaming its Barrio Logan campus, which is named after him. The bloom is off the once revered labor leader after his partner in the farmers' movement and fellow civil rights icon accused him of sexually assaulting her twice.
We believe the accusers. We believe Dolores Huerta.
San Diego State professor Roberto Hernandez says the allegation Chavez supposedly groomed and abused girls who worked in his labor movement is a real-life lesson of why he teaches what he does in his Chicano studies courses.
We shouldn't make icons out of people, but rather that movements are made by rank and file, movements are made by the people, and then leaders emerge.
Chavez became a civil rights icon, leading the fight for farmers' rights and co-founding the United Farm Workers Union, or UFW, with Dolores Huerta.
We shouldn't make icons out of people, but rather that movements are made by rank and file, movements are made by the people, and then leaders emerge.
This cult of personality that was built never served, I think, the broader movement well. And if there's going to be a future for this type of social movement, it can't be identified exclusively with one person.
This is a media manipulation tell. When the story shifts from the people who were harmed to the institutions processing the harm, you are watching the machine redirect the narrative towards the subjects it is comfortable with. The ones with press agents, the ones who give good quotes, the ones who can be on camera. The victims become the justification for coverage. The institutions become the coverage. Name it when you see it. That is the whole point of this show. Now, I saved this part for last because this is where Trapthink goes somewhere where other shows covering the story aren't going to go. And I need to go there carefully because I'm not making this point to score points or to use the church as a contrast that makes everyone else look bad. I'm making it because the church has something to teach here. Not because it got something right, but because it got it catastrophically wrong first. And it has been forced to reckon with that cost. The dynamic that destroyed the reputation of Cesar Chavez last week is not new. The church has lived this story loudly, publicly, and at enormous cost. Catholic dioceses across America and around the world spent decades protecting priests who were abusing children. The mechanism was identical to what we've described throughout this episode: a genuine cause, the gospel, the sacraments, the salvation of souls, authoritative leaders whose institutional role made them untouchable, an inner circle that knew and chose the institution, and victims who stayed silent because the weight of the symbol made speaking up feel impossible or futile. Protestant megachurches, parachurch ministries, evangelical institutions built around singular visionary leaders who turned out to be abusers, protected by boards and staff who decided the ministry was too important to risk, Mars Hill, Ravi Zacharias, the Southern Baptist Convention's decades-long cover-up, Bill Hybels at Willow Creek. These are not ancient history. Some of them are still unfolding.
For years, the name Ravi Zacharias was synonymous with apologetics, defending the Word of God in front of millions of people. But when Lorianne's allegations of sexual abuse came out in 2017, some people wondered if it could be true. But after a lawsuit and a signed NDA non-disclosure agreement, the allegations were quietly forgotten by the general public and many who worked closely with Ravi, but not by the victims.
New at 10, it was true. That's the finding of a new report on sexual misconduct accusations against former suburban megachurch pastor Bill Hybels. Willow Creek Community Church commissioned the report by an independent panel to investigate the allegations that led to Hybels' resignation. The report concludes, quote, Bill Hybels verbally and emotionally intimidated both female and male employees. Allegations of sexually inappropriate words and actions by Bill Hybels are credible.
The parallel to what happened at the UFW is extremely similar. Both have a genuine cause, a leader who became the symbol of that cause, an inner circle that knew and chose to favor the institution over the victims, who carried what was done to them often in silence, while the institution celebrated the man responsible. But here is what the church has that the media and political institutions currently sprinting to rename streets do not have: a theological framework for why this keeps happening. The church, when it's at its best and is actually functioning as it's designed to function, does not elevate human beings to positions of unaccountable authority. Every major confession, every serious theological tradition has within it a warning against exactly this. The reformers were obsessed with this, semper reformanda, always being reformed. That's not just a slogan. It's a structural acknowledgement that the institutions, including the church, drift towards self-preservation and away from the truth, and that the only correction is a constant willingness to be examined against something outside yourself. The warning against idol-making is not a side quest in the biblical story. It's central to it. From the golden calf in Exodus to the high places in Kings to the Pharisees in the Gospels, the consistent through line is this: human beings default toward building something they can point at and trust and march behind. And that default is the primary mechanism by which they are led away from truth. Most biblical scholars don't even support the idea of hanging a picture of Jesus on your wall. The logic is that people tend to use the picture as the focus of your prayer instead of God. Psalm 146, verse 3, "Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man, in whom there is no salvation." And then immediately verse 5, "Blessed is he whose help is in the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord his God." I want to be specific about what this is and is not saying. It is not saying trust no one. It's not saying all human leadership is corrupt. It is not a counsel of cynicism. However, it is the counsel or guidance of what corrected, ordered trust is. When your ultimate trust is in a human being, a movement leader, a politician, a celebrity pastor, or like an icon, and that human being fails, which they will because being human means failing, the failure takes your foundation with it. That is not a contingency, that is a certainty. The alternative is not distrust. It is grounding your ultimate confidence in something that cannot fail, and holding every human leader, every institution, every cause accountable to a standard outside themselves. That is what the church at its best is supposed to model, not perfection. The record is too long and too ugly for anyone to make that claim, but a structural commitment to the idea that no human being is beyond examination, that the protection of the vulnerable takes precedence over the reputation of the institution, that the trust is more important than the symbol, even when the truth is devastating. The institutions that built Cesar Chavez never had that framework, and so they had no mechanism for stopping what was happening. They had no structure that said the people inside the movement matter more than the movement itself. They had no one whose job it was to ask the uncomfortable questions regardless of the cost. And for 50 years, women paid the price for that absence, sometimes of their own volition. Here is what we know. Cesar Chavez abused girls. He groomed them inside a movement that he led, using the authority and trust his position gave him as the mechanism of access. The people closest to him knew, including Dolores Huerta, who was herself a victim, and they chose to protect the movement. The media built a myth around him for 50 years, elevating him to a federal monument and Oval Office status, and chose not to ask the questions that would have brought to light what was happening. The public, the people who sent their kids to school named after him, drove on streets named after him, watched presidents honor him, never had the information they needed to make an honest judgment. And the same institutions now sprinting to rename holidays and streets are not reckoning with any of this. They're managing the liability. That is the story. That is what's happening. But here's the trap I want to leave you with. Because if we end with Cesar Chavez, we've told you an interesting story about a specific person, and that's not what this show is for. The mechanism that built him is still running today, right now, in your media diet, in your political world, in your social feed. There is a version of this story being assembled somewhere, a cause that needs a face that is being elevated above scrutiny, an inner circle that is making the same calculation that the people around Chavez made. The cause is more important than the truth. The symbol is more important than the people inside its shadow. You won't see it the way you can see it now looking back at Chavez. You'll see the first symbol, and the symbol will look good because they always make them look good. You'll hear the cause, and the cause will be real because they always attach the symbol to something real. And the people who are questioning it will look like they are attacking something righteous because that's how the trap is designed. Proverbs 14:15. The simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps. Here's something even harder to do, and it takes some real mental discipline. Recognize that Cesar Chavez was just a man. He was not a saint. He was not a monster, just a man. And men are capable of being both a saint and a monster. He fathered children in secret. He abused women and girls who trusted him. He ran border enforcement operations against the very people his movement claimed to champion. Those things are true. Those things are reprehensible, and nothing, not the cause, not the legacy, not 50 years of street signs, changes that. And also, the farm workers who went from no rights to union contracts, who went from no legal recourse to a landmark labor law, who went from invisible to represented, that happened. The families whose quality of life changed because someone finally fought for them, that's real. That doesn't disappear because the man at the front of the march had a dark side. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Hold both of those things at the same time. Don't let the media tell you that you have to choose, that you either defend everything about the man or you burn everything with his name on it. That's a false choice, and it's exactly the kind of binary thinking that got us here in the first place. When you can hold that complexity in your mind, when you can say, the cause had merit and the man was flawed, and I don't need to resolve that tension to think clearly, you stop being so easily manipulated. You stop needing the saint. You can receive the good that imperfect people do without putting them on a pedestal that makes them untouchable. So go ahead, paint over the murals, change the street names if you want, take down the statues if that's what your community decides. Just remember one thing when the new statue goes up in its place. That's just a person too, and you already know how this ends. They will always build a saint. The machine does not stop. The next one is already being assembled. The trap is being the one who bows down to it. This is Trap Think. I'm Darren. Stay curious, stay honest, stay human, and I'll see you later this week.